Carmen Sandiego project is a little research project Nick and I here have been working on for some time now. And I would love to introduce right now my esteemed research partner, Nick DePetrillo, a great guy and friend to small animals as well.
Nope, not anything over a dog. I'm a total asshole too.
Yeah, it's true. I've seen him kick things. Anyway, so I'm Don Bailey. I work for ISAC Partners, and we're talking about mobile research, tracking people, information gathering, things of that nature. And, you know, it's funny. I don't know if anybody here played in the Hacker Poker Invitational last night because I can't see too well. But it's funny, kind of how that actually relates, right? Because poker's all about information gathering, what you can get from your opponent, how you can read people, how that information correlates to an end goal, right? And this is the exact same thing. We're taking broken pieces of information, resources from all over the place, many different areas of technology, and we're trying to amass them into one comprehensive tool, which unfortunately, due to various APIs and things, we tend to fail. But the idea is sound that you have all these resources, you can pull them together and hopefully harness it into a pretty elegant tool. And we're getting there, step by step, but still a little ways off. But with that said, I will let Mr. DePetrillo dive right into the actual material.
So we were going to make this Bill and Ted themed, but Don didn't like that, so that's your only Bill and Ted reference for the rest of the presentation. So for references, you won't be seeing the awesome references that was at the other GSM talk right before this and at the beginning of Black Hat. Ours kind of suck, so there's more there.
But the point is that all this stuff is online on that website, the carmensandiegographic.com/references. There's also a link to it on the main page. So we do throw out a lot of acronyms. We use acronyms obsessively. So if you get annoyed and say, hey, what the heck is that guy saying, you can reference it there.
And if you've been to all the other GSM talks here, you should know these by now. So moving right along.
All right, so this is just our basic introduction slide, which is pretty much a summary of what I really just said. We want to know everything about you, right? That's the goal of information gathering. It's the goal of information gathering from a civilian point of view as well as a military point of view. If I don't have access to the resources that the military and the government does, I still need that information for whatever nefarious or altruistic purposes I particularly have. So we want to know. We want to know where you are. We want to know why you're there. We want to know who you're talking to. We want to know where you're going to be going. We want to know where you're most vulnerable. And the pieces of information we've been able to amass at least give us a pretty decent window into that.
And we want to do it as stealthily as possible. We want to do it as covertly as possible. We want to maximize our success while we're minimizing our risk. So all the intelligence gathering capabilities that we're just going to show off today, every time you can give an attacker an advantage, that's never a good thing. So all the little granular pieces of information, they just help that person craft that attack to an individual or to a specific provider, et cetera, et cetera. And that just, again, minimizes their exposure, maximizes the successfulness of their attack. Do they even have an attack vector to play here? If they don't, then don't bother, because that might expose you if it fails.
Well said. So we did want to touch real quick on SS7. As everybody here knows, SS7 is the golden goose, right? SS7 is great. Gives you pretty much everything you'd ever want to have, except there are a lot of problems with that. SS7 is hard to get for most people. A lot of people.
For most people.
For most people. There are people, maybe even in this audience, probably wearing a black cardigan somewhere near the front, who could easily get access to SS7. But guys like, average Joes like myself and Nick, it's not necessarily easy. And it's expensive. And there are a lot of caveats as well. I mean, you've got to sign peer agreements. You have to deal with provider capabilities. You have to ensure that you're playing by the rules because everybody's always out to detect bad actors. And that comes with a lot of responsibility and a lot of, obviously potential problems. If you're trying to abuse the system just to test it, not even to do anything malicious, if somebody catches you, your provider says, hey, you know what? This is kind of shady. We don't necessarily agree with this, even though it's not necessarily bad. Terms of service, blah, 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 you're done. You're out a bunch of money. You've got a bunch of equipment left over that you maybe can sell off for a fraction of what you paid for. But the result is it's probably not going to turn out the way you want it to. So our goal, our entire goal for this project was to be able to access similar resources or the same resources that we would have access to with direct access to SS7 while bypassing SS7 as a whole, right? So we don't have to worry about those caveats. We don't have to worry about the expense. We're doing it from a cost-effective point of view and from a completely stealth point of view so that if we ever have the luxury of getting into SS7, great. That's awesome. It'll enhance what we already have.
Anonymous access.
Anonymous access, yeah. But we can't guarantee that we can keep it, and we can't guarantee that it's not going to go away, you know, in however many years or months or whatever. So that's the main focus. And also, I wanted to touch very briefly here. SS7 does have other problems as well. So many researchers today, very intelligent individuals, they do not necessarily have access to SS7 within the United States, and that comes with a touch of a problem. The United States SS7 providers do have a lot of different technologies put into place that detect bad actors and also mitigate the potential for bad actors. And a lot of that is implemented through firewalls that are actually tuned. They're SS7 specific firewalls, so you can actually firewall map or firewall whatever particular protocol underlying that there may be. And those issues are actually going to create problems for the researcher within the United States. It's my understanding, and I could be wrong about this, so caveat, but it's a little bit more open in the European Union. And as you will see, as we will describe, a lot of our research does demonstrate that that's true.
Yeah. And you know, if you're a government, some other government, and you've got a lot of money, you know, getting anonymous access to SS7 or buying some third world country bankrupt cell phone network that already has SS7 equipment and connections and contracts in place, you know, that's good and all, but you know, you don't need this stuff if that's the case.
We'd all love to travel to the Congo on a weekly basis, but it's not in my budget right now. I'll let you cover this next.
Oh, okay. So Tobias Engel from the CCC at 25C3 in Germany gave a wonderful talk and wrote a paper about HLR. And one of the things about HLR is that it gives you lots of great information, lots of great intelligence that you normally wouldn't get from looking at a person's handset externally. So for fractions of a cent per query through some third-party services that he demonstrated and talked about during his talk, you are able to get all sorts of good stuff. And I believe we have a slide that demonstrates all of that. Right here.
So this is one of our simple little scripts. It's nothing special. It just goes out and actually queries, you know, the HLR resources, and it'll query tons of HLR resources to determine whether or not, you know, the resulting data actually matches, or if there are anomalies or things of that nature. But the main point to pay attention to here is that we're just tracking my cell phone number on T-Mobile. And what's interesting here is that we're actually able to observe the MSC, MCC, and MNC. And for those that don't know, the MSC is the switching center. So generally, this number here kind of defines where you are physically, right? It's a high level. It doesn't necessarily say, hey, Don's on that street corner standing over there by the Starbucks, but it does tell me you're in Denver or Las Vegas or whatever. So there's definitely a lot of value to that number. But as we can see, it's just a number. You know, there isn't necessarily any correlation to any specific resource that says, hey, this number is Las Vegas or this number is whatever, right? So we'll get into how we actually reverse engineer that later. The MCC, of course, is the country code, and that just defines, oh, you're in America, awesome. And then the other code, the MNC, is of course the network code, which defines within the country you're in, T-Mobile, AT&T, or whatever your specific provider is. And of course we need to know that.
And in some other countries, the MSC value actually has embedded in it, let's say, a zip code or an area code or something like that, and it kind of makes it easy for people to reverse engineer what the MSC value that is being returned and what geolocation it kind of corresponds to. In the United States, that's not necessarily the case. It doesn't always work that way. And whether that was by design or just because that's the way it worked out, we don't know. But some of the techniques that we're going to talk about is how we reverse from one of these random MSC numbers to an actual geolocation. And then, of course, we're going to take this HLR information, all the data that it provides you. For instance, the MSC and the MNC, the MNC and the MCC Also tells you what provider a person has, even if they've ported your number. So that's always handy. And that's not something people really think about as a piece of information that should be privileged, but in fact it is. I shouldn't be able to tell that you had a T-Mobile number, you ported it to AT&T or vice versa, just from looking at you externally. And we'll get into that a little bit more and how that plays into some of these attack vectors.
So yeah, we really shouldn't care. We shouldn't care that there's a way to discern the actual physical location from the MSE. It shouldn't matter, because we don't know what the providers are going to do. We're looking at this from a completely black box point of view. So we can't make any guarantees. We can't make any guarantees about the behavior of the provider, the behavior of the network, except those that are defined by the standard. So all we can say is that, yeah, they're MSEs. They define some physical location. Awesome. So what does that really mean? Okay. Well, it means that we can actually, number one, get a unique value because this is a routing number that actually defines how messages are going to get to you within the system, right? So we have to figure out, all right, how can we extract this information without trying to infer information from the MSE specifically? So we'll get to that later.
Hey, can you tell that we kind of made these slides 30 minutes ago?
We're skilled in that fashion.
So funny thing about white pages. Is there white pages for cell phone numbers? No. And it's a funny thing. In some countries there are, but in the United States there isn't. And it's public and it's not public. You can buy a caller ID database, right? I mean, there's a couple of different providers out there, like Targus, I believe, is one, and Verizon, AT&T, and a few of these other folks generate their own and keep their own, and maybe they submit some of that data to Targus, and Targus is just a company that just handles caller ID databases and things like that and sells it. You can get a contract with them to update it every month, every day, whatever. But one of the funny things is a lot of these GSM providers actually add entries for your individual account name and your cell phone number into the caller ID database. And while doing caller ID backspoofing and some of these other techniques is not new, many people fail to realize that that's actually the case. And so if you buy an AT&T number or you buy a T-Mobile number or any GSM number in the United States, your name and that cell phone number is going to end up in the caller ID database. And so by using some of these different techniques, you can basically just reverse engineer the entire caller ID database. You limit your scope of what you're crawling, and what you end up generating is white pages for private cell phone numbers and the name. So now we're putting a name to the cell phone number, which means, and people always talk about these at freaking conferences and things like that, where they'll find a bunch of celebrity phone numbers and make Brad Pitt call Jennifer Aniston and listen to the fallout, but. Regardless, it comes in very handy for adding context to some of this intelligence that we gather. So where before you had just numbers, now you've got a name. And then with a name, you can start to gather other intelligence from other sources.
Well said.
You have nothing else further to add to the slide?
Let's move to the next slide and we'll see.
Fine.
No, so essentially this is cheap, right? We're talking fractions of a cent. It's extremely easy to build your own database, which is why we have been going around saying you don't need to buy it, okay? Because the fact is you don't need the entire United States phone white pages all at once. It's probably not useful to you. You're probably not going to care. And
it'll come with a lot of junk as well.
Yeah,
there's going to be landlines. There's going to be a lot of just unavailable numbers.
And the biggest problem with that is that this information isn't updated as often as you think it is. And for the information that's updated fairly regularly, you've got to pay quite a bit of money. We're not interested in doing that. Like we mentioned earlier, we're cheap. We're cheap guys. We're average Joes. We want to get away with this as cheap as possible.
I've been on point for a year.
Yeah, So I mean, why pay for it? And the actual cost with the provider that we use per lookup is like 0.0024 cents, right? And so obviously that gets you pretty far. And we just do bulk lookups on regions that we care about, and then we just go from there. So we can make a lot of information, a lot of associations based on actual corporations, organizations, associations between relatives, organizations in other countries that have similar phone systems. So like if you're an international corporation and you have a presence in the United States, and you have a presence in Canada or Mexico or whatever,